I am really happy to have you guys here. And I see some names that I don't always see here. Like I just saw a guy named Tom Rempel go by. Hi, Tom. Um, Tom knows this story better than a lot of other people. Um, so big list of people popping in here. Hi, Lester and Alicia and Anna and Brian and Craig and Dave and got a whole bunch of Davids and Greg and Joe and John and lots of people, lots of people. You're in for a treat today. You're also in for some cut of vein and bleed. We have two things you're going to experience today. One is I'm going to tell you about very significant medical progress and a setup that I think is going to change the way that cancer is studied and treated. And I'm also going to tell you a lot about my own story and a lot of things I haven't even told. And I'm here with John Carell. John is the CEO of reversingcancer.org. You guys get mail and emails from Evolution 2.0, Science Research 2.0, and reversingcancer.org, and those are all very tightly related. And John is the CEO, and he came on board a couple of years ago. I guess it was almost 3 years ago, in fact. I was overwhelmed. I was like, what did I just get myself into? And I called John and I said, what would you do if you were me? And he volunteered. I didn't ask him, or I didn't even think of this. And he volunteered to be the CEO. He said, you need a CEO because you need to meet these scientists and you need to do what you're good at. And running a nonprofit organization is not what you should be doing yourself. And so John's here. John, you got any comment before we just dive right in?
No, I was just looking at the list of people that are on, and there's so many people that have been so supportive financially, so supported with their time, and some of the directors are on, like Alex and George and Josh on, and it's amazing the amount because we're all volunteers. We all devote our time to this because of the extreme importance of it, and it's just great to have everyone and seeing all these names of people that either I've talked to over the phone and never met in person. It's just really cool. I'm really excited about this talk you're going to give, Perry.
So here we go. So it starts with, I'm going to show you a picture of my dad here. This is my dad. His name is Robert, and he was a pastor at a large church in Lincoln, Nebraska. And when I was 12, my mom developed bipolar with mild schizophrenia, mental illness. And but we didn't know what the problem was. We just knew mom was very, very erratic and life at our house was very chaotic. And we went through about a year and a half of trying to figure all that out. And my dad got her in front of a psychiatrist and he diagnosed her correctly and put her on medication. And when that happened, dad got in trouble with his boss at work, who thought that psychiatry was not a good thing. He thought that my mom was in rebellion, and so they demoted my dad from his job and publicly humiliated him in front of 2,000 people. And dad, in a very gentlemanly way, fought back, and he vindicated himself. He communicated very effectively that my wife is not having some kind of a moral failure or rebellion. She has a mental illness. It's a chemical imbalance. She's on medication. And you owe her an apology and you owe me an apology. And I deserve to be reinstated in my job. and he prevailed, despite we had relatives and people saying, "Get the hell out of Dodge," and this is an outrage. He stuck to his guns, and he got his job back, and he got his honor back. And a week after he got his job back, he went to the doctor with blood in his urine and found out that he had a kidney full of cancer. And so he had to go get surgery and get his kidney taken out. And I remember, at the hospital, we had some friends that came to spend the day with us. I remember this one lady named Laura Lee, and she spent the day with me. She was one of my friend's moms, and she just kind of kept us occupied because everybody was nervous. They could open dad up and cancer could be all over the place, and send him home and say, well, there's nothing we could do. Everybody was very nervous, but it looked like they got it all, and they took his kidney out and sent him home. And I vividly remember, every time we get to this time of year, I remember Christmas of 1983, which was 40 years ago. Um, Dad's healing up, and neighbors are coming over and bringing casseroles, and church friends and helping us shovel snow. And I remember I had a paper route, and Dad got on the mend, and so life got back to normal. Um, well, a year and a half went by, and one afternoon in the summer, I was in the basement and I heard the door open, and Dad came home at 2:30 in the afternoon. And that was an unusual time for him to walk in the door. And he says, Betty, my cancer is back. And my mom went hysterical and just became a emotional mess for about the next 3 months. And so cancer number two. And so he got in cancer treatments, and um, he went to MD Anderson. He went to Johns Hopkins, which are both top cancer places in the world. And they did everything they could, but it wasn't working. And this is, I'm pretty sure, my parents' 25th wedding anniversary, which would have been the last year that my dad was alive. And and it it got him when he was 44 and I was 17. It was my senior year in high school. And uh, one of the people on this call, his name is Tom Rempel. Tom was our youth pastor, and Tom had had a daughter named Dawn Marie who had leukemia when she was 4. And she was now, by the time this picture was taken, she would probably be 10 or something. But everybody knew the Rempels had gone through the horror of possibly losing a daughter. This was well known. Everybody knew they had gone through that. And I remember um, they came over for Thanksgiving the last year that my dad was alive. And I remember Tom saying to me, hey, Perry, if you ever want to talk about this, let's have a Coke. And I'm not even sure I was openly admitting to myself, but I know that what I was thinking was, why on earth would I possibly want to do that? Because if I sit down with Tom and talk to him about um, what all this is like, I am going to be a simpering, sobbing mess, and I'm going to lose it, and I don't want to do that. And so, no thanks. I think I'll take a pass on that. And it's funny is um, I've been unpacking all that with a counselor the last couple of years, and just kind of astounded at the degree to which I was able to shove all that stuff down and be stoic and courageous and not feel my feelings. But that was how I dealt with it. And um, so like I said, I lost my dad in my senior year. My mom um, had to go back to work, and she didn't have any real marketable skills. She mostly got almost minimum wage jobs. My dad had bought $100,000 of life insurance, and that's what my mom had to survive on. And I'll tell you a little more about that later. As I go through this, there's a video I'm going to show you at the end. There's a lot of little pieces to this story. But yeah, when I was a senior in high school, um, I became the man of the house. My sister just got married, and I was trying to figure out how to do school, and so off we went. So I want you to imagine for a minute what would happen if you could go in and get a simple test every year that would help you diagnose cancer at stage -1 or stage 0. Imagine that you could go to Walgreens and get a blood test and find out you don't have cancer, but your kidneys or your pancreas or your lungs or whatever organ is sending out stage -1 pre-cancer cells. And imagine if you got that early warning and you could do something about it then. And I want you to imagine all the people that you know or knew who could have been saved if that was even possible. And one time somebody said to me, a problem clearly defined is 95% solved. And here's the problem. The problem is the transition from no cancer to cancer has never been studied in adequate detail or scale. We have unimaginable amounts of data on stage 3 and 4 cancer after the horse is out of the barn. We have comparatively tiny amounts of data at the earliest stages, and the data already exists, but it's not getting collected and it's not getting shared. This on the screen, this is a boy named Alex Smiley. His parents are friends of mine, and his kids were friends of Alex. And this picture is from 2008 or 9, probably. And Alex died at age 13 of leukemia. And when you go to cancer conferences, because I've been to a bunch of them, you see all kinds of data and slides of genome sequences. You never see a picture like this. I was at a cancer conference 2 weeks ago. There were no pictures like this, but this is what leukemia looks like at age 13. And cancer treatment is a $250 billion epic fail. Stage 4 patients are no better today than in 1930. That's a fact. In 2023, we're using the same drugs for acute myeloid leukemia as we were using in 1977. Richard Nixon declared a war on cancer, and it's been a failure. The US government alone has spent $250 billion. That's a quarter of a trillion. That's 250 million, not gotten very far. And the fact is we can detect and treat cancer early. And it is easy to deal with cancer at stage 1 or 0 or -1. It is very, very hard to deal with it when it gets to stage 3 and 4. But unfortunately, 90% of the money goes into stage 3 and 4. And that's for most cancers, not all, but for most cancers, it's an exercise in futility. And 90% of the success is in early detection. And it's 100 times more cost effective at that stage, and you have a lot more runway to deal with it. So, some baseline facts are 1 in 5 cancer survivors will develop a new and different type of a second cancer. And 20% of all new cancers diagnosed will occur in a cancer survivor. And so there's going to be 2 million new cancers next year, and 400,000 of them will be in a cancer survivor. So, what if we had access to a repository large enough to be able to find the correlations? And what I'm describing here needs to be done, and it's never been done on a large scale. And so I am working with some of the best cancer people in the world to begin an open source tissue search engine for finding the cure for cancer. And it's already built. It is ready to run. It only needs electricity. And we just need to fund it. And I'm going to describe this to you. I'm doing this with Azra Raza, who I'm going to tell you about in a couple minutes. Let me tell you how I got into this. This is a picture of Bill Middleton and Laura Middleton, very good friends of mine. Laura, 4 years ago in November, I got a text from Bill. I was in Australia. I had done a seminar the day before. I was taking a day off, and I got a text. Hey guys, my wife Laura has pancreatic cancer. Well, I had a lot of experience with that because of a friend named Tom Hubyar, who I will introduce to you in a few minutes. And I was at Tom's side for a week when he died of pancreatic cancer. And I knew what all that meant. Pancreatic is one of the worst you can get. And on the same day, probably within a couple of hours, I got an email from this guy. This is James Shapiro. He is a bacterial geneticist at the University of Chicago. He is, in my opinion, the best evolutionary biologist alive today. And he and I became friends in 2011. And he has been my science mentor. And my book, Evolution 2.0, is basically James Shapiro for mere mortals. Because my book is written at a high school or freshman college level, and Jim's papers are PhD and above. And he is one of the best scientists by far that I've ever met in my life. And he emailed me the same day I heard from Bill. And he said, Perry, I want you to meet Frank Laukien and Henry Hang. And the three of us went to organize a cancer and evolution symposium in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we would like you to help. Would you help us? And I said, yes, in a hot second. And we went to work. And it would have probably been at Harvard or MIT, but COVID hit and we had to move it to Zoom. And that probably ended up being a good thing because everybody was at home and it was easier to get people on a Zoom conference than a physical one. We got all the speakers we want. We had 300 people in attendance, and it it was a success. And cancer cells are when your own cells forget who they are and they forget they're part of you, and they think that they are lone rangers floating around in the ocean, as it were, and everything around them is an enemy, and they go rogue. And cancer is when those cells, when you attack the cells, and they use their evolutionary machinery to evade whatever you just did. And their evolutionary machinery has an almost infinite variety of tools in the tool belt. And so it's incredibly difficult to fight because you're fighting the power of life to evolve. And I knew this, and Jim knew I knew this, and he knew I was a marketing guy, and he knew that if he could get me to help fill, put butts in the seats, that it would be a success, and it was. And so it turned into a monthly series. It turned into a series of conferences that have been going on ever since. And it was taken on as a working group of the American Association of Cancer Research, which is the largest cancer research group in the world. And this is definitely the funniest slide I'm going to show you today. This is, I took a picture of the list of steering committee members of the Cancer Evolution Group in the AACR. And you can see all of these people: Bill Ade, MD, MS, PhD, 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 MD, MD, PhD. And in the middle of this list, you have Perry Marshall, BS, which stands for Bachelor of Science. And so apparently they needed a little Perry Marshall BS. But these are not just a bunch of MDs and PhDs. These are actually some of the best cancer people in the world. And they invite me to their meetings, and I'm on their steering committee. And I was just at one of their meetings a couple of weeks ago, and they return my phone calls and they consider me a colleague. And I've managed to become a part of this very elite group of people. And as an outsider, I have an ability to do things that people on the inside can't do. And I can go out and rally support for a project like this in a way that they can't. And since I'm part of their group, then I have the advantages of being both on the inside and on the outside. And the secret to solving cancer is human tissues. And before what I'm going to show you today, there was not a way to break the logjam of continuing to pour money into late stage cancer where it's not really going to do much good. No one is studying cancer survivors for early detection of a new cancer. And that is what we're doing here. And we are going to do it, and we are going to make the raw data available to the public. So I want you to think of stages of cancer. There really is something called stage -1, and it's when they can detect cells in your bloodstream that are precancerous, but they haven't turned into cancer yet. And then most people are familiar with stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Those are household words. Well, as you go through these stages, in stage -1, you have a lot of time and it's not very much money. And then you get to stage 0 and you got less time and it's more money. And then stage 1, you got less time and more money, and less time and more money, and less time and more money, and less time and more money. And here's the thing. Billions and billions of dollars and tons of data are being studied and collected at stage 3 and 4, where it's basically too late. And that's 2080. That's the 20% of results that you're going to get for 80% of the effort. All of the leverage is over here between stage -1 and stage 0. This is the 80-20. This is where you're going to do 20% effort and get 80% of result. And there's almost no money and almost no data going here. This is basic common sense. You don't need a PhD in oncology to see that this is true. Now, this is Azra Raza and Jinsong Liu. I'm going to tell you about Azra in a minute. Azra is at Columbia University. Jinsong is at MD Anderson, which is the largest cancer hospital in the world. These two are detecting cancer at stage -1 today. They're already doing it. And I want you to imagine, what if we had access to tissues of cancer patients in remission? The blue ones represent patients that do not get a second cancer, which is most of them. And the white ones represent patients that come up with a second cancer. What if we had the tissues and the blood of both populations and we could study in detail as the cancer begins to appear, if we could see exactly precisely what all is going on, all of the biomarkers? Well, here's the thing. All cancer patients in remission return for a checkup every 6 months. They go back religiously. 80,000 people a year go back to MD Anderson for their annual checkup. And they are at higher risk every year for a second cancer than people that have not had cancer. So this is the ideal population to study if you want to understand the earliest stages of cancer, and just imagine frame by frame by frame, in slow motion, being able to watch it develop and see exactly what's going on. And right now, tissue repositories and biobanks, they exist, but almost all of them are in institutional silos. They're owned by individual universities or hospitals, and the records are private. And there is no known tissue repository for cancer patients in remission. It doesn't exist, and we want to make it exist. And it's all ready to go, and all we need is a little bit of money to collect and analyze that data. And now you're saving 4 times more lives for 1/4 the money. So let me tell you about Azra Raza. When our cancer and evolution seminar was in the early planning stages, Jim Shapiro, my mentor, told us about a book that she had written called The First Cell, which refers to the very first cancer cell that appears in your body. And I was fascinated by this book. Jim was very impressed by this book. And I got her on a podcast to tell her story. And I was very impressed because her book is a scathing indictment on the failure of the cancer industry to solve cancer and the immense amount of money that's being spent. And that we're focusing all of our energy on the wrong end of the 80-20 curve. And I asked her to be our keynote speaker, and she said yes. So she's at Columbia University. She has been treating leukemia patients for 34 years. She has accumulated 60,000 samples from pre-leukemia and leukemia patients over that time. She is curator of the world's largest tissue repository that's been collected by a single individual. She wrote a book called The First Cell. She's published in all the major journals. She's detected a new kind of precancerous cell in patients with pre-leukemia and leukemia. And she raised money for a company that studies that detects cancer at stage -1. And you guys know me. I don't have to explain, I think, very much about myself, except I'll just say my $10 million evolution prize and my evolutionary book, for all practical purposes, those are my PhD. And the Cancer and Evolution Working Group now has 3,500 scientists. So I'm the founder of a scientific society, co-founder. And and I brought an idea to the table that I think is very necessary to make this tissue repository revolutionary across the medical field. And I need to slow down and explain something. As an outsider, I've worked for quite a few years in my career in the technology industry. I helped build and grow a hardware software company before I started doing what I do now. And we sold that company for $18 million. And while I was working at that company, I became familiar with the open source software movement. And tech people know all about this, but most people who are not tech people really don't. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, if you worked in hardware or software, you would run into these weird zealots, and they were all banging this drum called open source software. And they said, software needs to be free and people need to share. And it sounded like kind of like hippie free love. It was like, that's a really nice idea, but how are you going to get paid? Like, we're all trying to make a living. How are you going to make any money writing and giving away free software? But it worked. And an open source software agreement says you can take this free piece of code and you can use it. You can do anything you want with it. But if you modify it or make it better, you have to share your improvement with everybody else. And if we can get tens of thousands of people writing and sharing free code, then all the software people in the world can have all the code they need to do anything they want to do for free. And it will help the world. And this started in 1991 with Linus Torvalds. Linus Torvalds created the Linux operating system, which was based on Unix. Unix was paid, Linux is free. And he became the benevolent dictator of Linux. And this idea started spreading. And now Android is free software, WordPress is free software, Linux is free, MySQL is free, Apache Web Server is free. The software that runs Ethereum is free. Ruby on Rails, JavaScript, all of these things came out of open source software. And all of the big platforms, Google, Facebook, Adobe, all of them have huge amounts of free software that they're built on that runs all their servers. And free software made the tech world that we today live in possible. And so probably your television set runs on Linux. And whoever made your television set took that free software and they put the pieces together that the way they wanted it, and they made your television set. And maybe your television set is $50 cheaper because they didn't have to buy an operating system from Microsoft. And so this has swept the software world. And the world we live in would be completely impossible without this. And when I learned about tissue repositories, and when I learned about how a lot of this scientific data is stored, it reminded me of software in the 1980s. And as a business consultant, I perfectly understand why, in the short term, it's in everybody's business interest to keep their data proprietary. So let me make really clear what I'm saying. Most scientific data that is actually used for cancer research is proprietary data. Only those scientists have access to it. Everybody else doesn't. Everybody else only gets access after they publish a paper. And it's published in all these little silos that are scattered around everywhere. It's not in one place where you can get it and sequence it and study it. This is a huge problem. It's part of the reason we're not curing cancer. And I looked at this and I said, if we make the tissue repository open source, that will solve this. We want some 14-year-old child prodigy from Italy to be able to download petabytes of cancer data with anonymized patient records, blood, saliva, stool, tissue, hair, fingernails, study all that data, look at the difference between cancer patients and not cancer patients, and figure out how to stop cancer at the very, very, very earliest stages. Let me come back to Tom in a minute. So during the pandemic, Azra Raza got a whole bunch of top cancer people on a series of Zoom calls, and she formed a little group. And she got 9 hospitals to agree to start collecting blood, stool, saliva, urine, fingernail, and hair samples from cancer patients in remission every 6 months when they come to their checkup, so that we can study the progress of early stage cancer. And these are some of the best schools in the world: Columbia, Harvard, MD Anderson, Johns Hopkins, Northwestern, University of Chicago, Freeman Health, Dana-Farber, City of Hope. These are the best cancer hospitals in the world. And they have already agreed to do this. We are only missing the funds to collect and analyze it. And we have a 501c3 structure in place for people to donate money and get their tax deduction. $2 million gets this thing going, and it's ready to start tomorrow. And Jinsong Liu, I mentioned him earlier, and Ken Pienta at Johns Hopkins, they are helping run this thing. This group that I told you about, they published an opinion piece in Scientific American. They said, we've got to find ways to detect cancer a lot earlier than we're detecting it. So it'll take $2 million to get this thing up and running. There are no other obstacles. The groundwork is completely laid. And here's the thing: we will intercept hundreds of patients with early treatable cancers by month 12. We will already at that point be in a position to say, Mrs. Jones, your lungs are in stage -1, and we need to de-stress your life or change your diet or get you exercising, or you need to forgive your ex-husband, or you need to do prayer or meditation or yoga or green tea or whatever it is, so that your lungs don't go into cancer mode. This will lead to stage -1 and stage 0 therapies for numerous cancers. And that's not all. This will also be equally applicable to Alzheimer's and dementia and diabetes, because they are all age-related, stress-related diseases. And you'll be able to study those diseases just as easily as you study cancer, because they're going to collect genomics, proteomics, metabolomics on all of those tissues. And it also means that the first donors that gets this thing off the ground become the Linus Torvalds of modern medicine. Linus is the guy that started the Linux operating system, and he's really the godfather of open source software. This is Rob Berkeley. Rob's funeral was 5 years ago today at Martha's Vineyard. Rob died of stomach cancer. He was a very good friend of mine. I was part of a mastermind group that he ran called Entrepreneur to CEO. I learned a lot about running a company from Rob. Rob was 58. Um, I want to talk to you about saving people like Rob, and then I'm going to tell you some more of my own story. We had some donors offer to match any gifts that come in up to $25,000. And so if you can help us out and make this a reality, any money that you put in gets doubled. And monthly pledges help too. You can donate at reversingcancer.org/donation, and John can put that link in the chat for you. Or you can send the checks to this address. And like I said, our organization is a 501c3 organization, and I hope you're able to see why I'm putting so much energy into this. And if you got $1 million laying around, this will really help us out. But even for regular, ordinary people, you might say, well, how much difference is it going to make to give 500 or 1,000 or $5,000? This isn't going to make much of a difference, but I need you to understand that it will, and here's why. When we approach big donors, they always want to know who's with you and who else is supporting this. And they don't want to be the first person. And this makes them not the first person. When we can say, we have 250 people or we have 500 people who are already supporting this, then it really comes a lot better across. And so end of the year is coming up, and you can get this on this year's taxes, and you can help us start what I think is one of the most important developments in the history of cancer research. And it will start saving lives immediately, because we will find out the people who are in stage -1 when you can still do something about it, and there's a lot of runway. And then I want you to do something else. I want you to write down the names right now of 2 people that you know who would care about this. I want you to write down 2 people that have either that they would care about this, or they've lost somebody, or they've done the boy. When my dad had cancer, talk about an emotional roller coaster. From one appointment to the next to the next, the numbers are up, the numbers are down, the numbers are up, the numbers are down. I would just experience these huge mood swings. And some days I just felt like the Walking Dead myself, because I was so depressed, and I didn't want to talk to everybody about it. It was awkward, and people would ask how Dad's doing, and if the numbers are good, then it's optimistic, and then if they're bad, I feel like I'm delivering this really bad news. And if you challenge just two other people to join you in supporting this, then it triples the number of donors. And that makes a very big deal. I don't think all of us all by ourselves can take out cancer, but when we start bringing in other people that we know and getting the snowball rolling and setting the stage for some large donors to say, hey, I see you guys are really committed to this, then it really does make a difference. And I am so appreciative that you're here and that you're listening. And I'm thankful that you're willing to listen and believe in what we're doing. I want to show you a very interesting video that almost nobody's ever seen. This is from May 4, 1986. My dad died October 4, 1986. So he didn't know it at the time, but he had 5 months to live. This is at the end of a church service. The pastor who's on the right, so on the left is my mom and dad, Bob and Betty. On the right is a guy named Gil, who's the pastor. And he got to the end of his message and he says, Bob and Betty, could you come up here to the front? And they had absolutely no idea what was going on. Everybody in the church kind of had the idea that dad was probably terminal and they knew things were not looking good. And I want to show you, I want to play a little bit of this for you.
To help you on your way west as far as we could get you. I thought, well, I drive a van, so I think it's great for anybody to go in a van.
Oh, I meant to explain. They sent a letter to everybody except us asking to raise money so that we could go on a vacation. My dad had never been to the West Coast, and he wanted to go to California. And so that's what they're talking about.
Van. So we said, well, we ought to have Bob and Betty have a van for them and their family to go. So we thought, well, we rent a van and then give them some money. We had a goal. We want to get you as far west as North Platte. So we got a van. Somebody has provided a nice luxury van. Not me. So that's taken care of. We praise the Lord for that. Then we thought you ought to have some money. We wanted it to be a kind of trip where you could relax, enjoy it. Robin's getting married. Well, you get somebody out of the house, it's sort of a relief. And, nothing personal, Robin and Ted. I'm sure it'll be great. We didn't want you to have to stay in a tent or anything. So we have, and I'm told here that hundreds of people have been involved in contributing, and you can still contribute because they're not gone yet. So if you said, well, I'm still thinking about it, well, up until the time they leave, we'll accept contributions. But we have enough to get them not only to North Platte, but to Ogallala. So we praise the Lord for that. We got to take, I feel like a quiz show now. What do you think it is? In fact, you'll be happy to know there's enough here that Marilyn and I will go with you. So we're glad for that. The amount is $9,200. That's great.
Yeah. So our friends gave us some money and we went on a vacation. It was enough money to hit every state west of Nebraska, including Alaska and Hawaii, which was amazing. In fact, when I was in Alaska, I mailed a letter to a certain girl named Laura that I later married. Um, and in fact, here, let me share my slides again. This is my brother Brian on the left, and me and my mom Betty and my dad on that vacation. I think that photo was taken in California, and I remember feeling we we never had $10,000. I mean, that was an unbelievable amount of money. And so we're driving around and we're eating and we're staying in decent places. And I just remember feeling very squeamish that, we're spending all this money and like we're not going to have any money um like when dad's gone. So are you sure we should be doing this? And basically my dad said, Perry, uh we are going to enjoy our vacation and we're going to spend this time together because it's our last vacation together, and we're going to trust God to take care of us. I'm like, well, okay. Well, it's funny looking back. The, there was after my dad died, there was a couple named Bill and Elaine, and they took my mom out to lunch and they asked her, Betty, what do your finances look like? And, she kind of gave them a vague answer. And they said, point blank, how much are you falling short every month? And she said, I'm digging into savings $800 every month. And they said, we would like to take care of that for you. He owned a scientific instrumentation company, and Elaine would come over to our house. She would drive over in her car and personally hand mom a check for $800 every month for I don't know how long. But that's probably why I was able to go to college instead of just going and getting a job and supporting mom. A couple years later, uh, Laura and I won $10,000 from a radio station, and that paid for my school. And so, and I remember going over to my mom's work. She worked at J.C. Penney. She worked behind the jewelry counter, and we took this $10,000 check over and showed her to her, and she burst into tears, and she goes, "See, I told you, God takes care of the widows and orphans." And like we did okay. And so, I believe that you can turn lemons into lemonade, and I believe that bad things turn into good things, and I believe that people get taken care of. But I I've actually been working with a therapist for the last year or so, and one of the things I've been processing is how absolutely terrified I was at that time. And I was so terrified that I wouldn't even admit it to myself. And I know a lot of you can relate to this because you've been through it. Like, how am I ever going to survive this? And I want to tell you about, I went to a John Eldredge conference once, and he was telling a story. His son had just gotten married, and so they had a brand new daughter-in-law, and they came for the holidays and they stayed there for a week. And he said, we sat down one night to have dinner, And I told her, I said, we're we're so happy to have you as a daughter and as a member of our family. And you're so lovely and you're such a wonderful addition to our family. And I suddenly burst into tears. I mean, it hit me like a sack of lead. It had never occurred to me. It had literally never occurred to me what my wife Laura missed out on by not having a father-in-law. We were stoic. And we were tough. And we were smart. And we were resourceful. But, now I was in my 40s and I realized how much she'd missed out on by not having him in her life. Not to mention me or my kids. And I think this is preventable. We can detect cancer at stage -1. We can do things about it. It is possible for there to be a blood test at Walgreens that you go take once a year. It is possible for them to develop therapies or drugs or treatments or ways to circumvent when you know that a kidney or a pancreas or a stomach or a colon or a prostate or a breast is at stage -1. We've barely scratched the surface of treating it at that level. I have a friend, Michael Levin at Tufts University. He's reversing cancer cells back to normal cells at will. I know this can be done. And I'm just tired of the way things are. How about you? Last night, I went to a gathering, and a friend of mine who had a little bit of skin cancer on his back last fall of 2022, he came up to me and he goes, I've got cancer again, and this time it's at the base of my spine. And we spent about half an hour talking about that. He's the guy we're talking about. That person, we can take their blood and some of their other tissues. There's enough of these people, and it's easy enough to do. We could have caught that at stage -1 6 months ago, but we didn't. We can, and I need your help to do it. So reversingcancer.org/donation. We've got a page there, and you can pay with a credit card or you can send checks to the address on the screen, 805 North Marion Street, number 295, Oak Park, Illinois, 60301. And John, let's get you back on the screen and we'll wrap this up.
Well, Perry, first of all, I know I've heard your story about your father and stuff like that, but it's a great reminder how we've all been affected by cancer. There's not one person on this call right now that either doesn't have it or has had somebody close to them have it and gone through those difficulties. And I think that's why everyone is on the call, because it's affecting our family and friends in ways that and we feel helpless, right? We feel helpless with these things. I was at a house that I have here in San Diego, and the neighbor came up to me and say, "Hey, how are you doing, Elizabeth?" And she just said, "Well, my mom just found out she has pancreatic cancer." And my heart just sunk, because it's like, and she knows that I volunteer with Science Research 2.0, and I was like, I don't know how to help. I don't know what to say other than I'll pray for you and I'll talk to some people and see if there's options. But she's in advanced stages, and we all have these things where either ourselves, family members, and friends have gone through this, and so we're all in this. We're all wanting to do something, and I think we all together, I know, Perry, that we've been talking as a group in the organization, is like, this is one of the things that has the chance of radically shifting the landscape for cancer, to basically cure cancer. It's got one of the best opportunities because it opens up things like that 14-year-old prodigy in Italy that may see something no one else has seen. And that's what it opens up. That's what open source, the power of open source is.
So
Linus didn't know what was going to happen with what he created.
no, they just knew, if we do this, this is a very, very good thing. And if we do this, it will create a resource that will accelerate. So like the whole internet and all of the services that people now take for granted are all possible because of open source software. And there's a lot of people on this call who are marketers, and marketers appreciate the value of data and being able to target people on Google or Facebook, and they know how valuable data is. Well, I want to try to give you a perspective. When I go to a cancer conference and see a presentation, number one, that researcher had to get that data. And that was the hardest part. It's hard to get cancer data.
Right.
We want to make it easy. And secondly, almost all the data they have is stage 3 or 4 data, because that's the only data that you can get. What if stage 0 and -1 and stage 1 data was available for everybody to get and it was free? It will affect healthcare the same way that open source software has affected technology. The world could be completely different in 20 years. It's completely different now because Linus and all those zealots who sounded like hippie, it sounded like a religion. And again, ask any software developer, where would the world be without open source software, and just let them tell you. So this is what we need to do. And we have 9 hospitals ready to go. And ASRA has Columbia University's all the buy-in. They're ready to do it tomorrow. And you might be asking, well, why aren't they already doing this? Is because it's not in any one person's or any one institution's financial interest to put up a few $1 million. It doesn't specifically help their bottom line. But there's an old kind of folk tale called Stone for the Stone Soup, where a guy is walking around with a bucket of water saying, "Hey, I'm hungry, let's make some soup." And one person throws a rock in there, and then somebody else throws some celery, and somebody else throws some carrots, and eventually you have soup. But people needed to see somebody throw something in. It probably helped that even somebody threw a stone in there, because at least it got it going. We're trying to solve a chicken and egg problem, and we can do it. And we're doing it with the best cancer hospitals in the world. I want you to notice all of that work is already in place. And I didn't do that. Osra did. She knows everybody in the cancer business. And a lot of people pay lip service to cancer, but they won't really do anything. And our community is doers. We do stuff. So everything up to 25 grand is going to be matched dollar for dollar. And what really helps us is monthly, regular, recurring donations. It's just make it that it is such a huge help to us. And John and I are volunteers. This isn't going into our pocketbooks. This just needs to happen.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things is that I think some people might feel like, what good is it what I give? If I can only give $250 a month, what good is that? And it makes a huge amount of good, because as we scale this and get more and more people involved in donating in both time and resources, it has a snowball effect. And plus, we are the seed. We're doing the first seed so that we can get some of these big donors that can end up coming in with 250, 500,000, million or more. And it's going to be because of you donating now that will get them more interested. I think one of the things that has been interesting to me is just how Osra, hearing her last year, and I won't share the situation, but she was talking about how she was on calls with dozens of billionaire medical people and companies and couldn't get them to take a simple jump onto something that was obvious. And it was like, how is this possible? She's been able to coordinate all these people, but they wouldn't take a jump. They don't like to take those risks. They want to see that other people have already bought in. And it's that kind of that social, we're social animals, but it's that kind of like, well, I'm afraid to kind of do something stupid. I'm going to wait for other people to jump in. And then when they see it's actually there, even if the idea is great, they need to see other people jumping in. And that's the impact we can have today. And I think this is one of those things, and I really believe it, that this is one of those things where it could put us in a brand new space to be able to solve it early and get rid of what I consider a corrupt method of how things are done. Let's not judge the people, but the systems in place. Yeah. Because $250 billion and basically things are no different than the 1950s. There's something going on. It just does. It's not working. The system's broken. So
there's a charity that Laura and I have supported for years where the founder of the charity, he's always had permission from us to use our money for the bleeding edge projects that he wants to try, that where he can't point to a well-established, well-oiled machine that most donors want to donate. And Laura and I were always interested in those, like, yeah, well, that's where all the breakthroughs are going to come through. And, I remember one time him thanking us, he goes, he named several projects. He said, if it wasn't for the money you gave to, Project X, Project Y, and Project Z, those would have never given off the ground, because we were able to get those going so that our most of, typical average donors could see the value that was being created by serving those people. And so this is new, but I'll tell you what, Osra is not an unknown quantity. You go research her to the heart's content. You read her book, The First Cell. Her husband died of leukemia.
And he was an oncologist.
Yeah, he was a leukemia doctor, and he died of leukemia. And her daughter's best friend died. When her daughter's best friend died at age 22 of brain cancer, that is what pushed Azra over the edge. She said, I have to go from being a doctor and trying to solve cancer from inside my profession. I need to become a public advocate, and I need to start beating the drum. And that's what caused her to write her book and be on NPR and be on Washington Post and all of those things. And Azra and I immediately hit it off because we are both mavericks, and we both are voices in the wilderness, and we both know what it's like to know that you know that you know that you're on the right track. And it's so hard to get other people to see that, but I know that some of you guys can see that. And I would really like your support before the end of the year, and let's get this thing going. Let's create a world where you go to Walgreens once a year, you get a blood test, and if you're in stage -1, they already have a whole battery of things that you can do to get your lung cells back into a happy state so that you don't even get cancer in the first place. That's what we want.
You know, and Eric Kolker even mentioned about stress and things. And the great thing about this repository and doing this process, it's going to open up all these different ways of looking at how cancer starts and how to deal with it. Like, I know Eric has been an incredible support for us.
Yes.
And he's done so much in helping, and his research in stress, like how it can create the environment for cancers to occur because of, undealt with traumas and those sorts of things. And so this repository allows us to look at and allow researchers to look at all different sorts of things. There's
That's
no
right.
limiting factors for how we can say this is happening and what are the causalities that are creating these environments and the ways of treating it. So it'll open it up radically, because today everybody is incentivized to keep their tissue repositories amongst themselves so that they can find something and create something they can make money at, which is
Yep.
fine. But when you don't have it open to the world and to people who don't have the money and the research capabilities to do that, that's what open source is giving it out to people, to everyone, to be able to open up and create these things. So it was just a great point that Eric made there. By the way, I know that a few people have said that they had a hard time donating if you're out of the country. We hadn't seen that problem before. So we're going to work on that. If you could email me, John, Jon, at reversingcancer.org. I've posted in chat a couple of times. Email me and we're going to solve that and get that out to you. I don't want to stop your generosity from happening. And some of you may have already given your full budget this year for charities. If you could just make a pledge, even just email us and let us know that next year you want to get onto a monthly plan or something, that would be great. We also want to talk about, we have a snail mail list, a list that goes out that we send out specifically on Cancer and Evolution 2.0, where we discuss these things and we send it by mail, and we'd love you to join that. If you're interested, please email myself, and Josh has posted my email address again. Email me your physical address and phone number, and then we'll get you on that list and get that, so you get that. We do probably once every 2 months? Are we sending it out every 2 months right
It
now?
might be every month. I think it's every month. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And we do have availability for email PDF as well. If you're not on that list, please give us your email address and we'll get you on that as well. But take action. Now's the time. We're really going to be going after this. This is what we're putting our chips in, all in on this and going for it this coming year. We really believe that this has one of the biggest chances of solving cancer. Any thoughts?
I just am so thankful for everybody. I know how busy people are in December because we all know how hard it is to get meetings and stuff. And this was very well attended. And we are going to post this on the evo2.org blog in the next day or two so that you can share this with people that you know, and they need to hear this story. People need to know, we're not going to tolerate the status quo anymore. People are sick and tired of your sister-in-law's numbers are doing better and better and better, and then 4 months later she's dead.
Right.
We're tired of that, and we've had enough. And so thank you so much for giving us your time and attention, and really appreciate all of you. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Perry. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining.